The intelligentsia, from Latin, intelligentsia, Polish, Intelligentsia, Russian, pronounced Intelligentsia, is a social class of people engaged in complex mental labor aimed at disseminating culture. This therefore might include everyone from artists to school teachers. Intelligentsia is the subject of active polemics concerning its own role in the development of modern society, not always positive historically, often contributing to higher degree of progress, but also to its backward movement. In a social sense, the stratum of intelligentsia arose first in Russian-controlled Poland, during the age of partitions. The term was borrowed from Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, in around the 1840s, to describe the educated and professionally active segment of patriotic bourgeoisie able to become the spiritual leaders of the country ruled by a foreign power, in an authoritarian way. Deprived of socio-political influence in the form of enterprises, or any effective levers of economic development, the educated intelligentsia became a characteristic indicator of the East European cultural periphery, unlike the German Bildungsbürgertum, or the British professions, for whom leading societal roles were available. In pre-revolutionary Russia, the term was first used to describe people possessing cultural and political initiative. It was commonly used by those individuals themselves to create an apparent distance from the masses, and generally retained that narrow self-definition. More recently, the term mass intelligentsia has been popularized to describe the intellectual effect of tertiary education upon a population. See the mass intelligentsia section, below. History of the notion. The emergence of intelligentsia preceded the term intelligentsia, as proposed by the Polish Romantics. It was associated with the development of cities, the mass spread of printing, and the construction of tenement houses available for rental occupancy in the urban core. That's where the embryonic intelligentsia, journalists, teachers, civil servants, could find an apartment outside traditional class divisions. In the opinion of historian Maciej Janowski, the rise of the intelligentsia, 1750–1831, the new intelligentsia became servants to the modern state, in the degree that the state they served, i.e. the partition Poland, became increasingly backward and repressive. In the Polish language, the term intelligentsia was popularized in a meaning close to the present one by the Polish philosopher Karol Liebelt, and became widespread in Polish science after the publication of his Omiozji on love of the fatherland in 1844. In this publication he defined intelligentsia as well-educated members of the society who undertake to lead others in a moral capacity as scholars, teachers, clergy, engineers, etc., and who guide for the reason of their higher enlightenment. The term was also popularized by a Russian writer, Pyotr Baborykin, in the 1860s, who proclaimed himself the godfather of the notion. He claimed that he borrowed the term from German culture, where the term intelligenz denoted the social strata of people engaged in intellectual occupations. However, he insisted on a special meaning of the Russia term, which had an additional implication of high intellectual culture. From there it came into English and several other languages. In English, this word is often applied to the intelligentsia in Central European, like Poland, and Eastern European countries, like Russia. In the 19th and 20th centuries, a narrower term, intellectuals, according to Pierre Bourdieu, can be applied to these members of intelligentsia, who not only work using their intellect, but also create cultural wealth. The emergence of elite classes of intellectuals, or well-educated people, had been observed in other European countries, e.g., intellectuels in France and Gebildet in Germany, as well. From Signs of Intelligentsia by Dr. Vitaly Tepikhin. Advanced for its time moral ideals, sensitiveness to fellow creature, tact and manifestations. Active brain work and persistent self-education. Patriotism, which is based on faith in its own people, and wholehearted, inexhaustible love to little and big motherland. Creative activity as a crucial part of intelligentsia lifestyle. This applies not only to artists, as many can consider, but also to scientists and engineers, ranging from creative approach to their main occupation to recreational culture, various hobbies, and self-improvement practices, like sport and hiking. Independence, aspiration to freedom of self-expression, and finding of themselves in it. Central Europe. Poland. The term intelligentsia was first used in Poland by Karol Liebelt in 1844. The Polish intelligentsia specifically was considered the backbone of the modern Polish nation. Members of the intelligentsia were well aware of their social status and of their duties, educating their youth with the objective to restore the Republic of Poland, preserving the Polish language and patriotism were considered the most important. Eastern Europe. Imperial Russia. Russian intelligentsia had a similar mixture of messianism and intellectual elitism. Nicholas II hated the intelligentsia so much he wanted the word removed from the Russian language. How repulsive I find that word. In 1860 there were 20,000 Russian professionals, 85,000 by 1900. Originally composed of nobles, the intelligentsia came to be dominated by classless people, raznochenцы, after 1861. In 1833 78.9% of secondary school pupils were sons of nobles and bureaucrats. By 1885 they were 49.1%. The proportion of commoners rose from 19 to 43.8%, the rest were priests' sons. Nicholas I kept the number of university students at 3,000 per year, fearing a large intellectual proletariat. By 1894 there were 25,000 students. Similarly, the number of periodicals increased from 15 in 1855 to 140, 30 years later. The third element were professionals hired by Zemstva. By 1900 there were 47,000 of them, most were liberal radicals. Revolutionaries avoided Zemstva on principle. Russian Marxist perspective. This section does not cite any references or sources. Please help improve this section by adding citations to reliable sources. Unsourced material may be challenged and removed. December 2013. In the ideology of Bolsheviks, intelligentsia is not a real class. Its status is described by the Russian word proslojka, which is normally translated as stratum, but in this context has a negative connotation, meaning liner, or separating layer. In other words, intelligentsia does not have a real place in the structure of the society. It is a mid-layer between toilers and exploiters. Intelligentsia grows by means of recruiting from among the people of labor, but its produce, i.e., the produce of its intellectual labor, is just a sort of goods ordered and paid by the exploiter class. Hence its independence is a mere ideological illusion, and in fact intelligentsia is by large a class of lackeys of bourgeoisie and landowners. While de facto being an exploited category, en masse it lacks a revolutionary drive. Ironically, this theory was put forth by the representatives of intelligentsia itself, notably Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky, among many others. In particular, Lenin is famous for his caustic remark that the intelligentsia is not the brain of the nation, it is the feces of the nation. Ironically, the fervent drive for professional education gave birth to new Soviet intelligentsia, which gave the current meaning to the term. This new class wasn't clearly defined. Instead, the labor of skilled professionals, scientists, and artists was likened to proletarian labor in the different field. These professionals were officially unified under institutions similar to workmen unions, for example the Writers' Union, and given strict standards for evaluating their work enforced by the corresponding expert boards. The approach to intelligentsia was varying. For example, scientists were kept in check by ideological sections of their universities, and, if doing sensitive research, were restricted both territorially and socially to so-called closed institutes with top-secret clearance, or even closed cities that gathered such scientists in remote research and development campuses. Artists, on the other hand, weren't contained physically, but any release, publication, or performance needed to go through union evaluation. Their means of production, from printing presses to film labs, were strictly regulated and centralized. Therefore, Soviet Union was able to let the natural creative process crucial for nation survival continue, but at the same time didn't allow for any official and ideological authority for the intellectual class on its own as a social class. Soviet Union. The section needs additional citations for verification. Please help improve this article by adding citations to reliable sources. Unsourced material may be challenged and removed. December 2013. The Russian Revolution polarized the Russian intelligentsia, together with all other strata of the society. Some of them emigrated, some joined the white movement, some joined the Bolsheviks, and some were Bolsheviks from the very beginning. Some tried to oppose Bolsheviks within the political framework of Soviet Union, some remained passive. Eventually the Bolsheviks got rid of all opponents by various means, ranging from forced deportation to execution. The remaining intelligentsia were supposed to serve the cause of working class. While the importance of this class was not underestimated, it was treated with reservation. In the late Soviet Union, the term intelligentsia acquired a formal definition of mental and cultural workers. There were subcategories of scientific technical intelligentsia and creative intelligentsia. In the post-Soviet period, the members of the former Soviet intelligentsia have displayed diverging attitudes towards the communist regime. While the older generation of intelligentsia has attempted to frame themselves as victims, the younger generation, who was in their 30s when the Soviet Union collapsed, has not allocated so much space for the repressive experience in their self-narratives. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the popularity and influence of the intelligentsia has significantly declined. Therefore, it is typical for the post-Soviet intelligentsia to feel nostalgic for the last years of the Soviet Union, perestroika, which they often regard as the golden age of the intelligentsia. Broader usage. Some authors use the term intelligentsia in reference to intellectuals and certain upper-middle-class professionals whose main task is to create and distribute knowledge. Max Weber considered intelligentsia to be a major category essentially distinct from other social categories, both in terms of attributes and interests. In his major work, Economy and Society, he used this term in arbitrary chronological and geographical frames, e.g., he wrote that this Christian preoccupation with the formulation of dogmas was an iniquity particularly influenced by the distinctive character of intelligentsia, which was the product of Greek education. When formulating major social classes of his time, Weber combines intelligentsia with other social categories, e.g., he defines a major class consisting of the propertyless intelligentsia and specialists, technicians, various kinds of white-collar employees, civil servants possible with considerable social differences depending on the cost of their training, and yet other classes privileged through property and education. Mass intelligentsia. The term mass intelligentsia describes the 20th century expansion of tertiary education to a saturation never seen before in history, and the resulting increase in moneyed adults curious about subjects, scientific, philosophic and humanitarian, beyond their own square on the chessboard. The term has been used regularly by sociologists, but was widely popularized in the 2010s by English broadcaster and writer Melvin Bragg. Bragg says it explains the popularity of book clubs and literary festivals that would historically have commanded little interest from the mass of middle and working class people. One author who has explored expressions of the rising mass intelligentsia is British writer Jules Evans. He takes it to include informal learning, espoused by novel teachers such as celebrity chefs and members of an internet forum for new mothers. American sociologist Richard Flax defines mass intelligentsia thus: what Marx could not anticipate was that the anti-bourgeois intellectuals of his day were the first representatives of what has become in our time a mass intelligentsia, a group possessing many of the cultural and political characteristics of a class in Marx's sense. By intelligentsia I mean those engaged vocationally in the production, distribution, interpretation, criticism, and inculcation of cultural values.